Hello again, everybody. Master Geek here for part 2 of my D&D playtest package review. This time I'm going to be covering the DM Guidelines document. Again, I have the lovely Mistress Geek sitting behind the camera doing the filming for me. Much like the first review on the How to Play document, this is going to be going hand in hand with a written review I have up on my website, www.geekworldonline.com. That's geekworld-online.com. If you're more of a reading kind of guy, you can head over there and check out the written review. There's not a whole lot of difference between the video review and the written review, except in my video review I mentioned just a few pieces of information maybe that I don't touch on the site itself. The document is going to open up with a piece of initial advice. It's kind of interesting, and I want to mention it because it's something that most D&D games don't really talk about. And this is telling the playtesting GMs that the rules aren't a set of laws. They're basically just a tool to assist in the storytelling. Now this does fit in with some of the impressions I picked up from the How to Play document that seems to be focusing more on role-playing than in hack and slash combat. It's definitely, in my opinion, a step in the right direction from what I saw as 4E's biggest problem, which is that it was, in my mind at least, completely combat-centric. The document is then going to move on to the basic rules, much like it did in the How to Play document. This time, however, it just gives about a page and a half or so a description of the basic rules of the system. It doesn't go as in depth as the How to Play document does. It just gives a quick summary of each different section. From there, it moves on to setting difficulty classes. This area gives the playtest DMs advice on setting DCs for the various tasks that will be attempted by the player characters. This also breaks down the DCs into levels or categories that will give an idea of the various difficulties. It starts at the lowest, which is trivial, then moves up to moderate, then advanced, extreme, master, and then the highest level, at least for the playtest phase, is immortal. Now, in discussing the checks themselves, the document talks about 3 different options for handling them, each of which I found actually pretty interesting and unique, at least in comparison to the last 2 editions of Dungeons & Dragons. First off is hazards. A hazard is something bad that happens if a PC fails a check by 10 or more. Now, hazards aren't always going to apply to a roll. It's only going to be really applicable when there's a chance that failing is going to have a nasty repercussion. So, if someone's kicking in a door that's unlocked, unbolted, really you could just swing open with a hand, and you happen to fail the kick roll, that's probably not going to be something that calls for a hazard. But if you're running and trying to hide from an angry, well-armed mob that's chasing you through the street, and you make a fail, that's a situation that might call for a hazard if you fail by 10 or more. The second thing it talks about is something called ability thresholds. And it really means just that. For some tasks, anyone with an ability score of a certain level or higher doesn't need to make a roll in order to succeed. For instance, to recall a piece of slightly uncommon arcane knowledge, it might have an ability threshold of intelligence 15. And what that means is anyone with an intelligence lower than 15 would have to make a roll, but anyone with an intelligence of 15 or higher would succeed automatically. They wouldn't have to bother rolling a d20. It's just something that they would be able to recall. And the third option that they talk about is requirements. Now, these are things that are required or needed to be present in order to even attempt a task. The example that they give is that of picking a lock. Without lock picks of some sort, at least improvised or standard, it wouldn't even be possible to attempt this task. But the advice on setting DCs really wasn't anything that I hadn't read in pretty much every other difficulty class-based RPG out there. However, I did find myself becoming more interested in the system when I reached the portion discussing hazards, ability thresholds, and requirements. The document then moves on to a section called Engaging the Players. This section is actually probably one of the most interesting. It came as the biggest shock to me. Basically, it says, if you feel like ignoring the rules, go for it. It reiterates the opening advice from the beginning of the document. This time it adds in some examples to keep things moving and to inspire roleplay from the players. First off, if a player describes the action that they're attempting in a really interesting manner, the DM should either grant them advantage or they should just let them auto-succeed at the task without even having to roll for it. Second thing they mention is if during a contest or opposed rolls for those of us that play other systems, if a PC can describe something in their surrounding that would make beating their opponent easier, the DM should grant them advantage. Now on the flip side of the coin, if a player describes an action in such a way that they're basically shooting themselves in the foot, then you should grant them a disadvantage. If a PC is looking to get knowledge from a barbarian by plying them with alcohol, say, well, the fact that this particular barbarian is a teetotaler might grant the PC a disadvantage. The next section is short and it kind of ties in with this one. It says to ignore the dice if a DM feels like it. Again, this goes back to the opening advice from the document, this time adding that dice work the same way. They are intended as tools to keep the story flowing, and the DM should only use them as it fits their playstyle. Next is the section on multiple checks. This is a pretty short section, and it's basically a slightly different description of something those who are familiar with 3rd edition, 3.5, 4E, or Pathfinder are already probably aware of. Taking 20. If a PC can take enough time to perform a task or given check 20 times, then they shouldn't have to roll for it. So if a particular task normally only takes a minute, and a PC is able to spend 20 minutes on the task, as long as that task is feasible to complete, then they should be able to succeed without having to make a roll for it. Next up, incidental actions. In and of themselves, nothing new here. This section basically discusses actions that don't easily fit into other categories. There are a bunch of examples given, but the best example, and probably the one that will be most used, is that of drawing a weapon. In D&D Next, since drawing a weapon can be done as part of another action, say drawing a sword from its sheath while you're charging an opponent, then it doesn't require an action to complete it. And that's basically the way all incidental actions work. If they're minor actions that can be done while you're doing something else, you don't have to waste any kind of an action doing it. You can just do it. Next, to talk about creature size and illumination. They're two separate sections, but I mention them together because everything in them is pretty much standard fare. Creature size discusses reach, space taken up by creatures, etc. Illumination discusses the effects of various levels of light, from bright light to dim light to complete darkness. Next, they bring up common tasks. Now, this is the very last topic in the DM Guidelines document. It's made up of a list of sample actions that the PCs might take. Now, apparently in D&D Next, instead of having a list of skills like they had in 3rd and 4th edition, this section instead just gives an idea of what PCs might attempt and then advice on how to handle it. The section is broken up between two different areas. The first area is exploration. This gives examples of tasks attempted on one's own. Some examples that they give would be balancing, climbing, attempting to recall a piece of knowledge, etc., as well as how to resolve them. The second area is interaction. This area gives examples of tasks that would require conversation or contact between PCs and NPCs. The standard here would be something like diplomacy, bluff, intimidation, etc. Now, please, again, I want to reiterate the fact that these are not given skills that you put points into. These are just various actions that a PC could take and how a DM might apply different difficulty classes to them, require various roles, what bonuses might be added to them. And that basically sums it up for the DM Guidelines. Now, overall, I found much of what I read in here to build upon the changes talked about in the How to Play document. This document stressed our P over hack and slash even more than the first document I reviewed, and I did find that interesting. Again, I do find myself wondering if Wizards of the Coast is distancing itself from 4th edition and its combat-centric mechanics, or if this was just what they thought of as a natural evolution of the game. In either case, I do have to admit that with each document that I read, I do find myself more and more impressed with where they could be heading with this new D&D Next system. That's it for this review, guys. Again, feel free to stay tuned, keep checking out my reviews. I'm going to read over the Bestiary next. I don't know if that's going to warrant a full-on review or not. It looks like it's just a list of some sample creatures that are in there, and in the playtest adventure they provide, I might just combine the playtest adventure and the Bestiary into one big review. I don't know. In any case, stay tuned, and thanks for watching.